Hello world and true believers. This is Brenda, a lost Aspie girl, and I wanted to make this video. And before I even get into my theory, I wanted, as I'm apt to share some anecdotal accounts of, to kind of give you guys some perspective on what I'm gonna try to say. Hopefully, I think you'll see the connections once I'm done, and then I will bring it back to my theory and deconstruct what it is I'm trying to say. Okay. Um, so I've told you guys a lot about my niece and nephew before, and how my nephew's been diagnosed AS, and my sister is in deep denial about that. But and I always, one of the things I've noticed as I've grown up is how very different they are, and how similar in many ways, like he is to me when I was growing up. I mean, there are many similarities with her, but for different reasons. And one of the things I notice about her all the time is she's very much like my sister, how my sister was when she was little, and asking questions all the time. Why? Ever since she was little, there isn't a time, as soon as she could talk, that I don't remember her asking why. Why? Even as simple as like, is this a chair? you know? And I always thought very interesting is that the neurosocial parent or adult, whenever a child is doing this, they will try to answer the question until they get frustrated and kind of shut them down. I don't ever do this. And because my sister's always amazed, she's like, how is it that you get me to stop asking you questions? I'm like, I don't get her to stop asking you questions. When she asks me questions, is what I do. So if she asks me something like, she doesn't usually call me auntie, she calls me Brenda, because she thinks I'm a child, but whatever. But she'll say, Brenda, is this a chair? And I'll say, what do you think? And she'll be like, I think it's a chair, And sometimes she'll do something, I don't know, more like she'll say, Auntie, why is the sky blue? And I'll say, why do you think the sky is blue? And she always has an answer. And I'm much more interested in what she comes up with. Because sometimes it's kind of creative. I mean, it's never usually anything too crazy. Because I think if she came up with something very crazy, like she was like, I don't know, I think that there's some kind of majestic bug that wakes up in the morning and mists the sky with blue, and mists it with a darker blue at night or something like that. I might be like, wow, that's really creative. I like the way your mind works, but actually, and then maybe I would give her something else. And then she said, why that? Then I would say to her, why do you think that? And then I would let her try to come up with her own idea of it. And, I've been thinking about this, and I think that is a very typically Aspie or Spectrumite, or those of us on the spectrum, whatever neuroatypical way of seeing things. Because the other thing that I noticed with my nephew is in his whole entire life, he doesn't ask questions. Like, he might ask a question like, Auntie, will you go make me a sandwich? That's not his voice at all. You know what I mean? But that's because he wants something. But if he wants to learn something, he's always going and figuring out himself. He likes puzzles, he likes gaming, and if you learn something, like, he'll talk to you about that thing for hours. Like, once we were on this harbor cruise in the Cape, and he just talks to me for several hours the whole time about this Batman game that he was playing, because he knows I like comic books. And we just talked about that the whole entire time. That obviously is another very typically Spectrumite approach to things. Okay, so there are these two extreme differences in them. But I think this also colors, like this right here, the neurological coloring of how things are going to go for the rest of their lives. I think that the Spectrumite-based child is going to always want to learn things on their own. And I think at a very young age, we stop trusting quote-unquote experts or authority figures, because usually the things that we learn on our own, if we're not sure about it and we do go to get clarification, or we go to confirm something, whatever, more often than not, the feedback that we get contradicts what it is that we found on our own. And at first, I think when we're little, this confuses us. You know what I mean? And there's a part of us that, like, they're adults, like shouldn't they know better than us? And what ends up happening is a lot of times it shuts us up and we're quiet. And I think even this is sometimes I think voluntary mutism takes many forms, but I think this is one of the starts of it. When you go to someone and you say, I learned this, blah, 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 and they're like, no, that's wrong. And you're like, yeah, but blah, blah, blah. And they don't even want to hear it, So there's that. And the other thing that I always notice is that as I was growing up, sometimes this makes me wonder if my dad is on the spectrum. I don't think he's, like, to the extent if you've ever read anything by John Elder Robinson, like he talks about what he calls proto Asperger, oh my god, Aspergerians, I can't even say it, like someone who has, you know, all the like Asperger's like type traits, but like none of the true quirkiness or things that are debilitating, like frustrations that we have sometimes, or secondary comorbid like issues. But he's like, when I was growing up, like one of the reasons I think I got along better with my dad is I didn't ask questions and I figured things out on my own. And I think very much appreciated that, because whenever my sister or brother did go to him with a question, the thing he would always say to them is, you know where the dictionary is, you know where the library is, you know the encyclopedia is, go look it up. And that was his approach to that. And he's like, and then he'd also say to them, because now that they ask, he's like, not only do I want you to go look it up, I want you to come back here and tell me what it is you learned. My dad used to get creative with things like that, but I'll get into that in a whole another video. And also the other thing that he still does, but he did a lot. He's actually become more socially as he's gotten older. But pretty much most of my majority of my life, whenever we go into a social function or anything, he'd always read, which is something I do a lot of times. And he would ignore people. It would frustrate my mom. Very much so. So there's that. But this is going to lead into what I'm talking about. So I think like when those of us on the spectrum, when it comes to things like the social hierarchy, those that are quote unquote like the experts or the authorities, we don't necessarily trust their word. Like I think that when we go to do our research, we it's kind of like data accumulation. We don't look at who's the person saying this. Like when I go and do research on the internet, I don't go and look at who said whatever it is that they said. I just go and I just write. If I go to a blog or whatever, it doesn't matter where I go. I just go down and I write down everything I see, everything. And some of it I put in a spreadsheet or do whatever. Only at the end do I start to kind of I start to connect all the dots and look for discrepancies, and that's how I determine whether something is true or not, or feasible or valid. And I think this is the whole seeing the pieces first and then backing up and looking at the bigger picture. And this is why I say it really bothers me when she'll say we have problems seeing the bigger picture. I think we need to look at the pieces first. They do it the other way around, and this goes into the whole authority thing. I think that when they do research, they just look for who said what it is, and they look for things that actually confirm whatever it is they've already decided in their head is what they think is right. So, and that's the whole, they see this big picture first, but they already have in mind what they think it is, and they only look for information that's going to corroborate that information, but only written by authority figure. So, and what that means is that someone who has credentials. So if someone has enough credentials in something, that they've gone to school long enough or whatever, I think it's also even part of the reason why I get scared to publish some of my books that I've written, is because of the fact that I know I'm not an authority in a lot of the things that I talk about. And I know to you guys that doesn't matter, because what we tend to do, and I don't know if, and you guys can tell me if you do this in your real life and in every kind of day things, whether it be research, like the way I just said, I perform my research, or even when you meet somebody, I don't try to find out like are they like where they went to school. None of that stuff matters to me. What I do is I tell them things, and then I see how they respond to me. If they say they know blah 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 blah, I'll say something about that if I'm knowledgeable about that, and I just see how they respond to that. You know, I also determine if they actually are willing to listen to me by, if I tell them a story about myself, how they respond. Because I notice that most of the time people only hear what they want to hear. And if they don't see you as an authority or an expert in something, they pretty much will dismiss most of what you say. I mean, it happens with me with my mom. Like, I'll tell my mom something, and I can just tell the way she responds to me that she either didn't hear me or she just outright dismissed whatever it was that I told her. But then my dad will come through the room and find me, and I know sometimes he does this on purpose just because he thinks it's hilarious. And he'll say pretty much the same exact thing I said, and she'll be like, really? No way. And I'm like, oh my God, Mom, I just said that. No, you didn't. And my dad will just walk away laughing, and I know it's because he knows how her mind works, and that it doesn't matter that I'm actually, and my dad is more willing to listen to what I say than my mom is. He's actually gotten less like that. He's gotten older. He's become kind of cantankerous and curmudgeonly, but whatever. I think that happens to a lot of old guys. um, and don't get me wrong, I love my mom. She's hilarious, but she's definitely very, very social. And only if authority and someone she considers an authority tells her something, will she listen to it. And I think this is how society has always been run, where like only if someone has someone has quote unquote authority, but we don't run that way. And I think this is why this actually is why a lot of times you know medicine is consensus based and things get backed up for a really long time, because think about it, how doctors are, they only learn when they learn something, it is a means to an end. If they're going to school, they're learning what they need to learn to get by, to get that job, to get that house, to get that boat, to get whatever, and maybe part of them wants to help people, but at the end of the day, gaining that job for themselves is just as important. I think that when we learn something, it's usually the learning itself is usually a means and an end. Maybe we started doing it for another purpose, but it becomes the process itself becomes an obsession to us, and learning whatever it is, and we become an expertise in that thing, but whatever it is that we're learning, but we don't usually necessarily have the credentials in it because we didn't go through the proper channels to gain that information. But the interesting thing about that, a lot of times, and I've said this before, our breadth of knowledge might not be as wide as many of the neurosocials out there, but the depth of our knowledge and whatever it is that we've been obsessed about is that much deeper. But because we're not, like I said, we're not considered experts in these things, a lot of people don't want to hear what we have to say, and that's sometimes infinitely frustrating. So I think, but also at the same time, this will cause us problems in everyday life, or a lot of times, I don't know, if you're talking to somebody, I think I said a few minutes ago, how somebody will make sure that their own credentials, they went to school wherever, they have whatever degree and whatever, they worked at this place, and somehow that lends weight to whatever it is that they're saying. But the other thing they'll do sometimes is they'll name drop, they'll say, well, blah blah blah, you'll be in an argument with someone and you say, I think blah blah blah, and they're like, well, I was talking to this person and they're the CEO of this company, so obviously what I'm saying is the truth. And you're just like, well, but you're not giving me any empirical evidence. I don't know why that matters. And that, I think, once again, is a different approach. And this has happened to me just even, okay, my parents, I think I told you guys a few years ago, moved to within the same town, Middleborough. They moved to a 55 and older house, one of those 55 and older communities. And my sister was convinced that it was only a half a mile from my parents' old house, which I definitely knew wasn't true. And my mom felt like it was farther than that. And they were in an argument about this. And because my mom doesn't like driving, and she's like, we're so much farther from town, and our old house was closer to town, and this is just difficult, and I don't like driving at night. And my sister's like, no, it's definitely closer. I know it is. Blah. But they had nothing. So I got frustrated, and I went to my GPS, and I gauged the distances. And my parents' old house to the new house was 5.1 miles apart. My parents' old house to town was was only half a mile. My parents' new house to town, because it's like in this triangle, was 3.4 miles apart. So their new house was much farther away from not only just town, but the old house. The old house was only half a mile from town. And they're arguing all this, and I come in with this data and the GPS to show it to them. And they look at me like I'm crazy, and they just keep arguing like I didn't say anything. And again, I think it goes to the whole authority thing. They don't look at me as authority. My words didn't have meaning. It didn't matter how much empirical data I had. And this goes into, and I'm not going to get into, I want to share with you guys a lot about my adventures in curing my fibrocystic breast disease, but I don't know, I think that should be a whole separate video by itself. But I mean, it's kind of like that, where the medical community was failing me. And I already had a feeling that I've been working in biotech so long, and I know a lot of the shady dealings that go on there. I wasn't fully surprised, but there's a part of you that when you go to the doctors, like and I've gone into fights with the doctors before because I'll go and do research myself on a lot of things that are given to me or whatever, and I'll come in and I'll say, I'm not comfortable with this, or I don't want to do this or whatever, and they get mad at me and they say I don't like the idea of research to go on WebMD. I'm like, I'm not going on WebMD. That's not, I don't use that. I'm doing true research. I'm going this PubMed you can go on. I have friends that work at different schools and they give me access to the libraries of the universities, and they allow me to go in there and look at published medical journals and things like that through there. I'm like, I look at actual studies, and and the studies that I've read show that this is not something that's good to take, so I don't want to take it. Blah, they'll get upset with me, and that's weird. And once again, that goes back to ego, and that is something else like I want to get into. I think it's all kind of tied together, and I think our ego works a little bit differently, and I'm still kind of like naysayer. And this comment is all precipitated on a comment that naysayer said to me yesterday about like how do I see authority like in those from the spectrum, like how reflective, like how does it play into it. And I think that we do have issues with authority and those that say that they're experts, because I think that whenever we want to know something, we go and we look into it ourselves, and we don't trust somebody's word just because they said something. Just like I said, the reason I quit drinking Coke Zero, for years I drank it and people would tell me it was bad. And I think this is something where I was in denial. I just wanted to drink it and I didn't want people telling me it was bad. But then one day sometimes words will be like seeds for me. And one day someone said to me, I read a study that aspartame causes brain damage. And that's all it took. I went and I researched all of that, found out not only about brain damage and all these other slew, and I think that even plays into some of the things with the cystic fibrosis breast disease and systemic candida, because I was drinking that for a number of years, and I think that and as soon as I read that and I realized that, I quit drinking it that day and I never went back to it. But it's not because I think other people a lot of times, like I think that's why, like Jordy John wrote to me about his experience with where he decided one day to quit drinking. Like he didn't need to go to AA or do any of that. I don't think we need that support group. We don't need census, because that goes back to what I was saying about my mom and my sister. Because I think it's not just about authorities or the expert in a supposed subject. It's also about a consensus. Because the other thing my sister likes to do to me when we get into an argument is I'll be arguing with her about whatever, and she'll say, let's call mom, let's call dad, and she'll do this whole consensus thing. I'm like, why don't we just have like the data right here, like whatever, like why are you bringing other people into our argument when it's personal? And she does it all the time, and I think that's another component of the hierarchy. It's not just about whether or not someone has authority or they're an expert, but also if they don't have all those other two things on their side, they'll actually bring consensus into it. And if they can get a number of people that agree with them, and if all these people agree with them, then it must be right as well. And that's just as frustrating. So I kind of want to, some feedback on you guys, what you think about that, so what that is saying, like our way of approaching these types of things, because I think, like that's why we have problems with sometimes authority or experts and things like that, and we'll get into arguments with them because we just want to use like the research that we've done and try to do the facts. And I think that we deal better with other people when they argue with us and they only use empirical evidence as the basis. However, the neurosocial brain, I think, is more likely to fall back on consensus, expertise, like qualifications, like credentials, so, and that goes into expertise or authority or authority, and those four components kind of all connect to each other. And I also think that's why when neurosocials are kids, they're more likely to ask their parents lots of why questions, because they're already that hierarchy is already being programmed into them, where I think we're more likely to go off and search for the answers on our own, because I think that that program is already there in our place. And someone else made a comment to me today that was very interesting, and I think it plays into this. She's like,